You're so chatty. You're so chatty. Yeah? Are you full on chatty? Hey everyone, it's Jessica. I want to welcome you back to my channel. Today we're going to take some time and explore independent author Eva Chase, who's available on Kindle Unlimited. And since finding her, I've gone on to read not one of her series, not two, but a whole 3. So I just wanted to talk about which ones I found first, what I liked, what I didn't like, what got me reading to the next series, and just discussing any kind of reoccurring themes or growth that I can see going from series to series. So I first found Eva Chase this year, and I read her Flirting with Monsters series. I found the main character in the Flirting with Monsters series so compelling and unique that I put her in my 5 kick-ass women here, and I stand by that. I think in the first 2 to 3 books, the main character here, she is like a redhead, cat burglar, thief, sort of got a Robin Hood vibe going on. She's very independent. She has moral, ethical goals that she's going after in her own way, and she's very resourceful. Even in the later books where she starts to get a little bit emotional and weepy, which is not necessarily a bad thing, it just starts to pull back on her kick butt sort of a personality. So even when she starts to become more emotionally vulnerable and a little less sure of her own physical capabilities, she's always looking for solutions and she's willing to try anything for her friends. It's great to have a character that's dedicated and loyal both to a cause and to the personal connection she's building. Something that you'll notice about the Flirting with Monsters series and all of Eva Chase's series is that they are all reverse harem stories. And I think all of them are executed with some degree of success. Flirting with Monsters is the most successful of her reverse harem stories. Initially there are 3 lovers and it goes to 4 for our love interest. I had a problem when the 4th one was introduced. I didn't think that he was great for our main character, but up until then I found the other 3 characters all very unique perspectives and providing different things to our protagonist. I thought that their ability to share her affections and even the way they viewed their relationship with her was really sweet. When the 4th character comes in, I don't like him so much, even though a lot of the later plot starts to hinge on their relationship, which might be why I don't like those later books so much. I just never really accepted him into the reverse harem. I never thought that he was a good pick for her, and even though she's very happy with him or whatever, that part didn't work for me. But overall, I enjoy all the sneaking into facilities, stealing things, trying to take down corporations, all that fun stuff. And also, Eva Chase has like this very personable style. There's a lot of humor in the situation, and it takes place in a modern setting, which I enjoy. You know, urban fantasy is my preference. So you know, the first book in Flirting with Monsters has about 2,500 ratings on Goodreads, and it's sitting at a 3.39 stars rating. I think it deserves a little higher. I think it should break into a solid 4-star rating. The overall series to me goes downhill after book 3, so I understand why some people are giving it mixed reviews, especially if they've read the whole series. The other thing I'll note about Flirting with Shadows before we go further, the main protagonist, she's a cat burglar. She has a best friend who has no powers or abilities. Instead of having that best friend just come along for the ride, be supportive but otherwise useless, she actually messes a lot of things up for the group of powered people, and she gets kicked out of the story for a while. And this made a whole lot more sense to me than just keeping a supportive but useless best friend around in a series. And I respected that Eva Chase tried to bring this best friend character back in with like the whole,
oh, well, you need your friends by you, and you gotta maintain some sense of a normalcy with this friend of yours.
like, I appreciated that she was trying to slowly reintegrate her in that way. It didn't work, but I liked the attempt. I liked the acknowledgement first that this character can't hang with all these superpowered characters with extra abilities and knowledge that she doesn't have. And I liked how we tried to work her back into a redemption arc and to some kind of helpful area later. I think too, with the Flirting with Monsters series, we introduce a lot of characters. So there's, you know, originally 3 lovers, turns into to 4. Then there's these 2 helpful fairy creatures who go away and are replaced by like 2 more helpful fairy creatures, and then these other 2 come back. It's never too much for you to keep track of. I always knew who was in play, and they all had distinct enough personalities that I liked them or didn't like them based off of their own traits. I never thought like one was a direct replacement for another, but the stories are fairly short and there's only so many character interactions you can cover. It starts to become a situation where the normal best friend is just the least interesting part of the story and is not worked back in well, and it's like,
why is she even here when we could get more depth on some of these other characters?
that was perhaps the one criticism I'd have with it. To be fair to Eva Chase, like the normal best friend is a staple of these kind of chosen one style stories, and it's always really hard to keep them relevant. And it looks kind of scummy when the chosen one just kind of abandons them. Another thing worth noting for the Flirting with Monsters first book is that it's number 4 in humorous fantasy, and it lives up to that category. It's really funny. It's 113 in dragons and mythical creatures fantasy. There's no dragons in this story. I love me some dragons, I would remember. There is a shadow beast that has a couple dragon-like traits in it, but it is used as a pet, and it's smaller, and it's not very ferocious, so I wouldn't classify that as a dragon. There are also some of the shadow beast slash fae characters in here that have a couple dragon traits, but none of them are so distinctly dragon that I would classify them that way. So I don't necessarily agree with that. It's probably the mythological creatures part Eva Chase was sort of going towards. My thing is that she created her own unique group of creatures called shadow beasts, and they're most like fae creatures. So I would put it in a fae fiction category or even in a demons category, although I think they lean more fae than demon, but I wouldn't put it in a creature's perspective. And I would really hesitate to put it in a creature category because all of the men that the protagonist gets involved with are these shadow beast beings, and they are humanoid, so I don't want to give anyone a false perception of what's happening in this story, but just this category makes it feel like maybe they're not, which is why I wouldn't necessarily have placed it here. Although you have to know 113 on the list means that it's successful there. Maybe what do I know about that? It's also 115 in action and adventure fantasy, the perfect category for it. The next series I read by Eva Chase is the Bound to the Fae series, and to be honest, I didn't even realize that this was by the same author who did Flirting with Monsters when I first started reading it. It wasn't until after I finished reading the book and marked it in my Goodreads and started doing some research on it when I realized,
oh, I've already read something by this author. I've read the Flirting with Monsters series.
I love this Bound to the Fae series. I mention it in my first quarter reads in the werewolf corner over here, and I also mention it in my second quarter reads up here. And the reason that I keep mentioning these books is even though I did not like the first book in this series, the second book was better, and the third and fourth book really pulled me into the series. Again, all of Eva Chase's books are reverse harems. This one is no exception. The worlds between the Flirting with Monsters and the Bound to the Fae series are actually pretty similar. Instead of shadow beasts, they're fae, and the magical creatures live in an alternative world to the humans. Except in the Flirting with Monsters, the monsters were the ones who came into the human world and got to be the fish out of water sort of scenario. And over here in the Bound to the Fae, our main protagonist, the female, she's plucked from the human world and thrust into this alien fae world. Overall on Goodreads, this series has 1,500 ratings and it's sitting around a 3.18. I am looking at the first book in the series, so I sort of understand where the 3.18 rating comes from, but this is definitely like a 4.5 star series so far, and I'm really excited for the next installment in it. The magic system that they use here is really solid. They have a system where you need to know the true name of something before you can manipulate it, and when you learn the true name, it ends up being like engraved on your body somewhere as a tattoo. It just appears there. So all of that's really cool because you can tell right away who is very magically powerful because they have a bunch of tattoos for all the words that they learned. It sort of fits in with that Rumpelstiltskin fae lore that we're already kind of familiar with, and alters it just a little bit, although not too much, because each one of the Fae also have a real name, and if you shared your real name, you could be controlled by whoever knew it. So it's a logic consistency with a fairy tale fantasy scenario we already know. In this case, the Fae come in three groups. One can turn into wolves, one that can turn into ravens, and one that can turn into rats/mice. And that brings in a shifter element. With the wolf group specifically, when they turn into wolves, they do change their mindset to a more animal, primitive, instinct-based drive. So if you like that part of shifter stories, that is available to you within this series. We've really only gotten to know one of the Raven Fae so far, and we haven't spent a lot of time with him transformed as a raven, so I don't know if he is also going to have like those corvid animal instincts. He does lean into like a cold logic, intelligence kind of vibe, which corvids, you know, are very intelligent birds. So in that way, he's sort of embodying those traits even in his human form. But I don't know if bird intellect and the way birds see things is just so different than the way that mammals handle things that we're not ever going to dive into that in this story, especially because it doesn't feel like it would be relevant at this point in time, or if that's something that we'll see later when we get more transformation or we get more involvement with the ravens. The mice fae we don't have a lot of time with at all. We know that they don't have their own homeland and that they cause a lot of mischief, but we've never met a single one of them yet, so that'll be interesting to see as far as their shifting abilities go. And it will be interesting too to see if they actually do cause a lot of mischief and do have sort of like this grand destruction plan. One of the things that Eva Chase does really well is she sets expectations with these mythological pieces and elements, and then she turns them as time goes on in the series. So she did that well in Flirting with Monsters. She's been doing it pretty well here in Bound to the Fae, and I've loved Bound to the Fae. It's incorporated so much different folklore and mythic elements. It's combined two of my favorite fantasy creatures like the werewolf shifters and the Fae, and it's taken apart from both of those and combined it to make it something new that I've just really enjoyed it. I love our protagonist. She's very compassionate and thoughtful. She perseveres through so many things. They have been showing that she has some unique abilities that they don't understand where or how she's gotten them. It's suggested that it's like possibly a lineage thing, but we don't really know at this point in time. And her uniqueness, while notable and interesting in the story, has never overshadowed anyone else. She is not the most powerful being in the room, and it doesn't look like she's going to become the most powerful person in the room. There's so many other players who are stronger or more capable than her that she has to watch for and sort of consider and politic against. And I'm really enjoying this kind of sort of different chosen one scenario, because everyone has something like a skill or a talent that makes them special. So I don't have a problem necessarily if a character also has something like that. It's when the skill or the talent that makes them special and unique is just so far out there and they're just so high above everyone else, it becomes like a cakewalk for them to get through things, or it makes them stand out too much and not fit with the rest of the world. And this main protagonist definitely still fits with the rest of the world. I can't recommend this Bound to the Fae series enough. I think it's the most recent of Eva Chase's works as well, and you can tell that in overall her ability to craft a world, characters. Each one of the love interests in this is a very unique character with her own tone and feel. I get why she's with the other men. It's different when she's with each one of them. They each provide something different and unique, and they feel like a whole person and not just like a different set of traits that were necessary for the story. Looking at Bound to the Fae, the first book in Amazon, it is number 27 in the folklore, which makes sense. It pulls in so much different folklore. I think that's a perfect category for it. It's number 53 in new adult and college fantasy. It's number 60 in werewolf and shifter suspense. And all of these make sense to me as categories and fit really well with the overall series. Then the last story I read is going to be The Dragon Shifter's Mates. And this is one of Eva Chase's older stories. To be honest, I didn't really care for it. The different shifters that she is mated to are all too similar. The main character here was too special, like put on too high a pedestal, too unique, too on her own. I'm always looking for dragon stories. I love dragon stories, but I didn't get like a lot of dragoness. Yes, she could transform into a dragon, and yes, she could breathe fire. And this particular dragon has this really cool alternative flames that she can continues, where she breathes these flames onto people and they're compelled to tell the truth, which I liked. That was awesome. One cool trait wasn't enough to win the story over for me, and I just thought that there was a lot going on that was sort of shoulder shruggy. It is an urban fantasy. It does take place in our world, and I think the way that the shifters hide their own colonies and sort of live in nature preserves and stuff is cool. The way that they had separated different kinds of shifters out was sort of neat. And this series, just like the other series, has a best friend who doesn't have powers, and Eva Chase does pretty good trying to work her into the story, even though she doesn't for realsies matter and is outclassed and doesn't necessarily always make sense. The best friend has a lot of connections, and she's able to get a hold of people and move materials around that are necessary to help the shifters fight against some vampires that are feisty. So that was a cool use of the human, that she used her intellect, her people knowledge, and her ability to get to know people to help them acquire the materials they needed when they needed them. And you can see her using this ability to sort of get to know some of the other shifters and befriend them and maybe even start her own relationship. So that's kind of cool for best friend. I think the issue with this story wasn't so much the story itself, although some of the characters were flat. The problem was that I had just finished reading the Harriet Chronicles Chelan. This was too similar to the Harriet Chronicles Chelan, which, let me tell you, Harriet Chronicles Chelan series by Laurel Chase did not like at all. I won't get into why I didn't like it here because it's not what this is about. I will say it's a shame because the world building in the Harriet Chronicles Chelan is really good. It might be worth a read if you're looking to create a fantasy story, like an urban fantasy story with an alternate universe that people cross over between, because it's available on Kindle Unlimited, just so that you can get a look at the world building, because a lot of the world building is really working in the Harriet Chronicles Chelan. But back to the dragon shifters mates, I didn't like any of the love interests. I thought all of them were pretty generic. There was one guy who stood out because he was super reluctant, and there was one guy who stood out because he was super eager. And everybody else, there were two others, they don't have any trait worth talking about. They're all very devoted to her. They're all interested in her and are willing to work with each other and help strengthen the community because of her.
Well, all of us have to get along and like each other because we want to keep being with this chick. That's what's going to sew our whole community together. We have a whole lot of other issues and infighting, and we're going to overlook all of that. We're going to say that the people that we're supposed to represent are exaggerating or whatever, just being too fussy because I want to keep being with this chick.
I didn't always feel like there was a lot of negotiations going on or a lot of acknowledgement of what could actually be the problem. They spent a long time trying to make the dragon lady seem like she was a really good compromise, take charge kind of lady, and I just never got that energy off of her. I never felt like she was really a leader or a lead, or that she really handled negotiations well. So this series I didn't care for as much. It is one of Eva Chase's older series, and I think you can tell because some of the elements from it that are good or interesting, she works into other parts of her series. And I think too, just the overall quality of writing, you can see a huge growth for her as a writer. Some of her ideas are just more fleshed out, and she's more capable of having these more full and embodied characters. So I think as time has gone on, she's really come into her own and has been more able to tell the kind of story she wants to tell. Now, because the Dragon Shifters Meets is an older story, it does have almost 3,000 ratings, and it's sitting at a solid 3.88. So if you are looking for a reverse harem shifter kind of story, this could be a really good one. It's 158 in vampire thrillers. There are vampires in this story. They are the antagonists, but we don't get a lot of vampire time. It's number 166 in the werewolf and shifter thrillers, and of course that makes sense to me. And it's 208 in psychic thrillers, and there is no psychic anything happening here. There are some fae beings in the story categories and they have magic, but it's not psychic magic. Yeah, I just don't agree with that category. I'm kind of confused about what psychic thrillers are supposed to portray anyways, so maybe that's perfect and I just don't even know it. These are the 3 series that I've read by Eva Chase. I hope you guys found something from here that you like. If you enjoy this kind of video, please go ahead and leave a like. If you want more recommendations or thoughts about fantasy and science fiction books, usually from Kindle Unlimited, please consider subscribing so you'll be the first to know when more of those come out. If you're looking for other Kindle Unlimited stories, I'm going to go ahead and link my Kindle Unlimited playlist here. It's going to give you a whole bunch of fantasy, science fiction, suggestions, and ratings. Thank you for watching, and I want to encourage you to always keep reading. See you next time. Bye!